Looking at the skull, first bone we're going to look at is up here. That is the frontal bone. We do have a suture that separates the frontal from these back two bones. That suture is the coronal suture. The top two bones then are the parietal bones. There is a suture that separates the two parietal bones, and that is the sagittal suture. We have a bone that makes up the back of the head and all underneath, and that is the occipital bone. There is a suture that runs up, over, and down, and that's the lambdoidal, and it does separate the occipital from the parietals. If we look sideways, there's another suture that runs up, over, and down, and it separates this bone from the parietal bones, and that would be the what suture? That's the squamosal suture. Starts right here behind the mastoid, runs up, over, across, and then down. All right, and that's the squamosal. So therefore, if this is a parietal bone, it's separated. The squamosal separates it from the temporal bone. Right. There are four structures on the temporal bone that you need to know. The first one is the big one, and that's the mastoid process. Then we have a thinner one behind it. That's the styloid process. Right. And then we have the opening. The opening is the EAM, but you can't tell me EAM, right? You have to tell me it's the external auditory meatus. I mean, can you tell me EAM and then work through it? Sure you can. And if you want to throw acoustic instead of auditory, that's fine as well. And then the zygomatic arch, which is the whole bone here, right? Makes up the whole cheek, is made up of two processes. There's a process here and there's a process here. So let's look at this process here. If the process is coming, let me go this way. The bone that the process comes off of is opposite of the bone. What I mean by that, if this is the temporal bone, then this is the zygomatic process. If we go up front to the zygomatic bone, the process then would be the temporal process. Okay? And then together it is the zygomatic arch.
And where's the bone,
the zygomatic bone itself would be right here in the front. So if I point right there in the front, I'm looking zygomatic bone. If I slide out here, I'm looking for this temporal process of the zygomatic bone. If I go back here, I'm looking for the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. And then if I do that, then I'm looking for the zygomatic arch. Pleasure. Yes. If we go back again to our squamosal suture, there was our temporal bone, so we have a bone right in front of that, right? That would be the sphenoid, right? The sphenoid also does make up the lateral aspect of the eye socket. So if I can pinch and hold there, I'm holding the sphenoid. All right? If I slide now to the medial aspect of the eye socket, there are two bones that make it up. The one that is closest to the surface or superficial would be the lacrimal bone. In this case, it's kind of colored in orange. Right? If I go deep to that, then I'm looking for the ethmoid. So ethmoid is deep, lacrimal is superficial.
Inside the eye?
On the medial aspect of the eye socket. Lateral aspect of the eye socket, that would be sphenoid. Okay, but medial side.
Medial is the lacrimal.
Lacrimal, and then deep is the ethmoid.
Now when you pinch it, that's the sphenoid.
And if I pinch, then that's sphenoid.
Gotcha.
If I look at the nose, that's the nasal, right? If we look inside, you can see the thing that separates it into a left and right side. That's the septum. But I want you to tell me that's a septum. Now, on a written part of the test, the septum itself is made of two bones. It's made up of the vomer, and it's made up of the ethmoid. Okay? But for our purposes next class, for a demonstration, it's just if I'm pointing to the septum, I want you to tell me that's the vomer. Okay? If I'm looking for the ethmoid, then I'm going to point deep inside the eye, right on the medial aspect. Okay? Basically, instead of it being running up vertical, it's been tilted one side or the other. So basically, as the airflow goes up in, it affects that airflow, or depending on how bad they may have to get it fixed. On the lateral aspect of the nasal bone, you should see two little bumps when you look in there, right? And those would be the nasal concha, all right, on the inside. If I'm looking for the bone that holds the upper teeth, that's the
maxilla.
Maxilla or maxilla, right? If I'm looking for the bone that holds the lower teeth,
Mandible.
that would be the mandible. There are 4 things on the mandible to know, right? If we look at the little holes, that would be the mental foramen. If I slide to the side, then I'm looking at this structure. That's the coronoid process. We have this little notch here, so therefore that's the mandibular notch. And then we have one more thing here, and that's the mandibular condyle. Okay?
Like, can you go through those 3 more times?
Coronoid process.
Just so, like, it's
There's one in front. Mandibular notch is a depression. And then the rounded condyle is the mandibular condyle. If we flip underneath, again, we're looking at the big hole. Big hole is the magnum, and holes are foramen, right? So magnum foramen. If we look on either side of the magnum foramen, we have these little rounded processes. This articulates with C1, which is the first bone of the neck. These would be the occipital condyles. And then the other thing down here is if we look underneath, this is the hard palate. Hard palate is made of 2 bones, right? Most of being the maxilla or maxilla. But we do have this little bone here in the back, and that is called the palatine. So if you think hard palate, think palatine. All right? And then the last 2 things on here to know is if we look in the front, we have 2 foramen, right? This is the orbit of the eye, right? So if I'm below the orbit, this would be the infraorbital foramen. If I'm above it, that would be the supraorbital foramen. Right. And holes, again, are for where nerves and blood vessels and things like that that can penetrate and get out to the face and the muscles and things along those lines.
That's it?
That's it.